日本史学習に最高にもってこいのサイトサムライアーカイブスポッドキャストへようこそ。美しい自然にあふれてる縄文時代から波乱万丈な幕末まで全時代を網羅して日本史の隅から隅まで一緒に語り合いましょう。では早速日本史の世界へ。
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Samurai Archives podcast. Today I've got something new for you. So the podcast has been around for about 9 years at this point, so finally, at long last, we'll start to look at the lives of the Sengoku Daimyo, the warlords of the Warring States period of Japanese history. And this episode, I'll be looking at the life of the Sengoku Daimyo Mori Motonari. And this will be the first of hopefully many big biography episodes. But my plan is to tell a story bringing together the politics, battles, the trickery, the deceit, and all the rivalries. To tell a story. So, if you like what you hear, please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/samuraiarchives. And check over there for updates, bonus contents, and all that other stuff. Also, another option that you have to support the podcast is to go ahead and rate or review the podcast on iTunes. Written reviews are great, but your other, quicker option is to just click 5 stars and call it good. Whatever's easiest for you. All right, so before we get started, one thing worth mentioning is that because I relied mostly on secondary sources, you actually get a lot of conflicting information. Nothing really big, but rather than point out every little detail, I'll mostly just try to combine it all into a cohesive narrative. Generally speaking, where things conflicted, I went with a preference for the most plausible version, but also gave the most interesting version some weight too. So, Mori Motonari is probably one of the lesser-known daimyo in the West, despite being probably, really one of the greatest warlords of 16th century Japan. Although he played a big role in his own way, he's not really thought of as being on the same level as, say, Toyotomi Hideyoshi or Oda Nobunaga. Under different circumstances, he probably could have become one of the biggest players in the Sengoku period, although that's not to say that the Mori Clan didn't have an impact. They definitely did, but his motivation didn't come so much from unbridled samurai ambition, but more from protecting and building his clan and family. Unlike a lot of other samurai, he and his sons were considered the epitome of family loyalty, because to a lot of other daimyo, their kids were considered, to a greater or lesser extent, kind of expendable. But Motonari was different. Family loyalty was where the Mori Clan got its strength. So I don't know if you remember the scene in Akira Kurosawa's movie Ran, where the Lord illustrates strength in numbers by having his sons try to break a bundle of 3 arrows, but he tells them that 1 arrow is easily broken, but 3 is much more difficult.
1本の矢はたやすく折れる。だが束ねた3本の矢は折れん。たとえ太郎一人ではしのいきれぬ大難が起ころうとも、兄弟3人力を合わせれば、一文字家もこの国も安泰じゃ。
The apocryphal story that Kurosawa was referencing is actually inspired by Mori Motonari. The story goes that Motonari had each of his 3 sons try to break an arrow, which of course they were easily able to do, and then he had them try to break a bundle of arrows, and they couldn't do it. He used this to illustrate to them that they were stronger together as a team, but individually they could be broken. Motonari's 3 sons in this story were Takakage, Takamoto, and Motoharu, and they'll come up later in the podcast. But contrary to popular belief, Motonari actually had about 7 or 8 sons. They just don't really factor in that much to the story at hand. But it seems that this story of the 3 arrows is just a legend, a very well-known legend, but made up during the Edo or Meiji period. But it's apparently based on a discussion that Motonari had with his sons at some point in his life. So he probably didn't literally sit them down and have them try to break arrows, but apparently he did have some sort of conversation about them working together. And it's interesting to note that the Mori Clan crest is a line over 3 dots, which, kind of seems to me like it could refer to the 3 sons in the arrow, but I'm not really sure if this is the case or not. I mean, I guess it could be random chance, but my guess is that this tale of the 3 arrows probably came from some Chinese classic or was just some sort of common sense proverb in Japan at the time, and the family crest was inspired by that. But anyway, this scene in Ran, and actually the entire movie, was inspired by the life of Mori Motonari. Kurosawa originally wanted to make a movie specifically about Mori Motonari, Apparently, the idea came from the story of the arrows, and he'd had that in mind for quite a while, but then he eventually decided that he would use the idea as an interpretation of Shakespeare's King Lear. So he retold the story into a sort of anti-Mori Clan story and ran as what came of it. And this is what Kurosawa actually had to say about it.
I started out to make a film about the Mori Motonari, the 16th century warlord, whose three sons are admired in Japan as paragons of filial virtue. What might their story be like? I wondered. If the sons had not been so good. It was only after I was well into writing the script about these imaginary sons of a Mori Clan that the similarities to Lear occurred to me. Since my story is set in medieval Japan, the protagonist's children had to be men. To divide the realm among daughters would have been unthinkable.
So the tale that I'll tell today is about a man from a scrappy little clan in western Japan, constantly on the edge of destruction, who was able, through strategically shifting alliances, trickery, and the strength of family loyalty, to carve out a piece of the empire pretty much against all odds. And after this episode, you might want to go and check out Akira Kurosawa's movie and see his fictionalized version of events. Okay, so to start off, I'll give you some thumbnail basics of this time in Japanese history. At the most basic level, a daimyo is a 16th century version of a landholding warlord who was the head of a clan and could probably field a reasonable army. During the chaos and upheaval of Japan's warring states period, otherwise known as the Sengoku period, it was pretty much every man for himself, and vassals overthrew their lords, lords crushed their neighbors, people were put to the sword left and right, and this went on for at least a century. Well, at least depending on how you define the start and finish of the Sengoku period anyway. That's actually a sticking point in the history books. But generally speaking, it all started with the Onin War in the 1460s. So I'm not going to go into it here, but I might later on in another podcast. But the Onin War threw the entire country into a state of civil war. And the start of the Sengoku period is usually tagged as somewhere between 1477, which is the end of the Onin War, and the early 1490s, when Hojo Son came to prominence by taking over Izu province. Speaking of provinces, you might want to grab a map of Japan's provinces, since there's a lot of movement across provinces in this episode. But just in case you don't have one on hand, I'll give you a sort of basic overview. The area of Japan that we're concerned with in this episode is in western Honshu, so roughly 450 miles to the west of modern-day Tokyo. Most of the action takes place in and around Aki province, which takes up the western part of modern-day Hiroshima prefecture. Suo province, where the Ouchi clan was based, bordered on the southwest of Aki province. Directly to the west of Suo was Nagato province, also held by the Ouchi. Bingo province bordered on the east of Aki province, which was held by the Amako clan, at least early on. Directly north of Bingo province was Izumo province, the home province of the Amako clan. And bordering on the north of Aki province was Iwami province. And Iwami province was the home of the Iwami silver mines, which shifted back and forth between Ouchi and Amako control. Now let's look at the Mori clan before Motonari. Let's kind of look at the history of the clan here. So, although the Mori clan became one of the strongest clans of western Japan by the late Sengoku period, it started out as a very small but locally influential house. The Mori clan name comes from the area in Sagami province where they originally hailed from. And Sagami province is actually on the other side of the country and is located at modern-day western Kanagawa prefecture. The Mori clan was sent as land stewards to Aki province in 1336 on orders of the Ashikaga shogunate, and by the early 15th century had increased their holding substantially. And then we come to Mori Motonari himself. So let's start at the start. It's 1497, and the central government is falling apart. Prominent daimyo are essentially using the Ashikaga shoguns as puppets at this point in a vie for control, although none can really seem to hold on to the slippery reins of power for more than a few years at best. This is what the world looked like when Mori Motonari was born on February 4th, 1497. Anyway, he was born at the start of the Sengoku period and lived long into it. Motonari is an interesting case for a daimyo. He was one of the few daimyo who gained massive power and control over a wide area, but was eventually stymied by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He was as successful as some of the greatest daimyo of his time, but he was eventually surpassed by Oda Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. And if things had played out differently, the Mori clan could have been the major player in Japan. And I suspect that geography more than anything else was the biggest contributing factor to the kind of limits placed on the Mori. Now, don't get me wrong, by pretty much all objective measures, he was a total success. And as an aside, another daimyo that had a similar run to Motonari was Chosokabe Motochika. Probably an even lesser-known daimyo than Mori Motonari, but he's another daimyo that rose up from nothing, eventually took complete control of the island of Shikoku, and might have been destined for great things if Toyotomi Hideyoshi's brother Hidenaga hadn't come knocking. Motochika is a pretty fascinating character on his own and would definitely make for a good podcast episode in the future, but point being, these were men who started with very little and came to national prominence, but were sort of big-timed by the guys who would eventually go on to unify the country. So anyway, like I already established, it's 1497, a good 5 years after Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Motonari was the second son of Mori Hiromoto, who was himself an accomplished warrior and raging alcoholic, and his mother was from the Fukubara clan, which were vassals to the Mori. Mori Hiromoto spent the 1470s along with his father, Mori Toyomoto, killing his way to prominence in a Mori clan power struggle to eventually consolidate his hold, as well as negotiate the delicate wartime alliances necessary to keep the clan alive. It seems that the Mori clan was in a very precarious and, well, kind of unenviable position through the 1490s, wedged uncomfortably between the Amako clan to the east and the Ouchi clan to the west, two clans that were perpetual enemies, and to a lesser extent contending with the Takeda clan in Aki province. And this Takeda clan wasn't the Takeda clan out of Kai province, Takeda Shingen and all that, but I feel like this came up kind of recently on the podcast in another episode, but this Takeda clan was a corollary branch of the Kai Takeda, but not really associated with them directly. Much like the Mori clan, they had been moved to Aki province by the shogun about 200 years before, give or take. And this particular Takeda clan doesn't really figure all that much into the history, for reasons I'll get to, but the Amako and the Ouchi loom large over the history of the Mori clan. The Amako clan was a power in Izumo province since at least the 1300s, and were well established as a legitimate local power by the time Mori Motonari came along. As for the Ouchi clan, they'd been around since at least the 12th century, and took Suo and Nagato provinces from the Ashikaga shogunate representatives in the 14th century, but were then quickly legitimized by the shogunate and became official rulers thereafter. As the centuries went on, the Ouchi clan's home base in Suo and Nagato became a hub of international trade, and by the Sengoku period, they had expanded into both northern Kyushu, Iwami, and Aki province. By the end of the 15th century, Hiromoto found himself in the growing shadow of the Amako clan, who were based in Izumo to the east. And at this time, Ouchi Yoshioki was becoming heavily involved in the politics of Kyoto, so while he was away, the Amako grew stronger. And put a mental pin in that, because the Amako clan plays a prominent role in the history of the Mori clan a little later on. And I want to stop here for just a second to point out that I'm actually going with Amako with a K pronunciation rather than Amago with a G, which is actually what a lot of sources seem to go with. But I'm going with the K for the simple reason that a direct descendant of the clan I met pronounced it Amako with a K and couldn't figure out where the G came from. So as far as I'm concerned, that's straight from the horse's mouth, and I'm going with that. But anyway, around the year 1501, Mori Hiromoto was pressured to assist Ouchi Yoshioki in his support of the deposed shogun, Ashikaga Yoshitada, despite a general decree by the emperor to oppose the former shogun. Basically, the emperor had decreed that all should oppose the deposed shogun and his Ouchi lackeys. But this decree didn't really do its job, and some battles ensued, as they did during the Sengoku period, resulting in an end to hostilities at a bit of a stalemate. But Ashikaga Yoshitada was allowed to stay in northern Kyushu, and eventually he'd be reinstated as shogun about 7 years later in 1508. But it seems that, as far as Mori Hiromoto was concerned, negotiating these hazards as a small-time daimyo in these turbulent times had taken its toll. Soon after the cessation of hostilities, he retired at the relatively early age of 34, moving to Koriyama Castle with his little son Motonari. where he basically proceeded to drink himself to death. I can't really figure out why he retired at such a young age. Maybe it was the alcohol or what. I don't know. The sources don't really indicate what was going on with him, but I imagine that the day-to-day pressures of running a small clan among the wolves was too much for him. But he did eventually die of alcoholism, so yeah, there's that. But anyway, on his retirement, he left the clan nominally in the hands of his oldest son, Okimoto. Although since Okimoto was only about 8 years old at the time, I have to imagine that Hiromoto still handled the day-to-day stuff, or at least had his vassals take over. Not really sure. It's just not all that clear what was exactly going on at that time. But like I mentioned, probably numerous times to this point, is that Hiromoto was a raging alcoholic, and he ended up dead of alcohol poisoning in 1506. And at that point, Okimoto was then officially in charge at the ripe old age of 14 years old. And it kind of seems that alcoholism ran in the Mori family too, as Okimoto died in 1516 of alcohol poisoning, just like his dad. And at that point, Mori Motonari was named to act as guardian to the late Lord Okimoto's son, Komatsumaru. The idea here being that once Motonari's nephew Komatsumaru came of age, he'd assume leadership of the clan, and Motonari would relinquish his leadership role. So, as you can see from this background, Motonari was born into a legitimate warrior household, albeit a relatively small clan with a drinking problem, and basically a goldfish swimming among the sharks, if you will. And as the second son of the lord of the clan, the leadership was originally not in his future, at least until Okimoto died. So random chance intervened, and Motonari found himself nominally in charge of the Mori Clan, and on the unexpected path to becoming one of the greatest daimyo of his age. So I'm going to set aside Motonari again for a moment and go back to the Mori Clan itself. So the Mori Clan had a long history, like I had mentioned, going back to the early 13th century, where it was founded by the son of an advisor to Minamoto Yoritomo. About a century later, the Mori Clan established a permanent home in Aki province, where the lord at the time, Mori Tokichika, was appointed as Jito, or land steward, by the shogunate. So the clan was well established in Aki province by Mori Motonari's time. And like I mentioned up front, for most of the clan's history before and including Motonari, the Mori clan was subservient to stronger clans and often on the edge of extinction. And so with all that said, Motonari found himself nominally in charge of the Mori clan, taking over for his dead alcoholic brother and in the name of his nephew. About a year later, the most powerful daimyo in Aki at the time, Takeda Motoshige, took advantage of Okimoto's death to launch an attack on the Mori and their allies, the Kikkawa, bringing 5,000 men to attack Arita Castle. The Mori were still vassals of the Ouchi clan, but were really unable to get any support from them since they were occupied elsewhere. So Motonari himself led an army of about 850 men, which included about 300 Kikkawa men, and led them out to contest the Takeda. So when the enemy forces came head-to-head, Mori forces stopped short and launched a hail of arrows, one of which killed the Takeda's vanguard commander, Kumagai Motonao. Takeda Motoshige, who had been occupied with the siege of the castle, marched his forces to the battlefield to lead the army against Motonari. The two forces came on each other at the Matauchi River and engaged in battle. The Mori forces began to falter, and in an effort to take advantage of the weakening Mori forces, Takeda Motoshige led his forces in a charge across the river, which resulted in him being cut down by arrows. Legend says that the 20-year-old Motonari faced down the enemy commander himself and launched the arrow that killed him. I mean, cool story, but who knows if it's true. But with his death, the Takeda forces broke and Mori forces came away with a victory. So not bad for Motonari's first battle. And this victory served to increase Motonari's power and influence to some extent in Aki province, and probably had a hand in his marriage to a daughter of the Kikkawa clan. This marriage would extend his power and influence in the territory and also produce the three sons that would become legendary in the story of the Mori clan: Takamoto, Motoharu, and Takakage. And like I'd mentioned, he had more children than this. Actually, I think 11 in total, boys and girls. But these are the three sons that are remembered, and these are the ones that involve the story of the arrows that I'd mentioned earlier in the podcast. But we'll get to these guys later. So despite his victory and his growing fame and his marriage to the Kikkawa family, Motonari was still subject to the whims of the strong powers surrounding him. The Amako clan had started skirmishing with the Ouchi clan in 1518, and this went on until a peace was established in 1521. Amako Tsunehisa, the head of the Amako clan, and in his early 60s at this point, decided the next year to expand into Mori territory in Aki province, forcing Motonari to break ties with the Ouchi and become vassals of the Amako clan. So this side switching is a pattern that Mori Motonari engaged in quite a lot, and he really comes across as, I don't know, I guess you'd call it a clever opportunist. Despite being the lord of a relatively weak clan, his strategic flip-flops between allies was a strategy that he parlayed into a position of power later on. This guy was a master politician, and his defection from the Ouchi to the Amako was a good example of this. The Amako began to put pressure on the Mori, and knowing that his run with the Ouchi was basically at an end, he switched sides. At this point, the Amako clan was still nominally at peace with the Ouchi, so apparently this change of loyalties didn't really stir up any issues at the time. All that being said, Amako Tsunehisa quickly forced Mori Motonari to turn on his neighbors. Motonari was directed to attack the Kurata clan stronghold of Kagamiyama Castle, while Tsunehisa attacked Kanayama Castle. Tsunehisa eventually failed to take Kanayama Castle, but Motonari used the sort of tactics he'd become known for to take Kagamiyama Castle. He convinced the uncle of the lord, Kurata Naonobu, to betray and kill his nephew and hand over the castle. So Motonari had another success in battle under his belt, although his celebration was probably a little short-lived because Tsunehisa then had Naonobu executed despite Motonari's pleas to spare his life, and ended up taking the castle for himself. And this event probably made the forced alliance between the two even more distasteful to Motonari. So, as it stands, the Mori clan was still subject to the whims of a larger and more powerful clan, and things got a lot worse. His nephew, so Okimoto's son, and head of the clan, died, and the mantle of leadership then fell squarely on Motonari. And at this point, he moved into Koriyama Castle. But things didn't go smoothly, as they never seem to do when succession issues come up, and Motonari's half-brother Mototsuna was implicated in a plot to assassinate him and take control of the clan, and his vassal, Katsura Hirozumi, turned on him. Both rebellions were crushed, but Motonari's position was still not stable. In less than a year, the Mori-Amako alliance broke down, and Motonari defected back to the Ouchi clan, along with some other small regional lords. Around this time in 1528, Ouchi Yoshioki, the head of the Ouchi clan, died and was succeeded by his son Yoshitaka. The Amako made an effort to capitalize on this turn of events with some skirmishes, and with some success, most notably the capturing of the Iwami silver mines. In the meantime, while the Ouchi and Amako were occupied, Motonari went to work consolidating the Mori holdings in Aki province and gathering local allies, chief among these the Shishido, Kumagai, and Amano clans. Anyway, Tsunehisa continued to plot and scheme in the background, although not directly confronting Motonari, and in about 1529 he began scheming with the Takahashi clan to turn on Motonari. The reason that he picked the Takahashi clan is because they were relatives of Motonari's older brother Okimoto's wife, and they had, in fact, supported the rebellion staged by Motonari's younger brother Mototsuna 5 years before. Since the Takahashi were still allied with the Mori, Tsunehisa believed that they could get close enough to assassinate him. But the plan was eventually revealed, and Motonari quickly crushed the Takahashi. The Mori clan gained a huge amount of territory from this, extending to Iwami province in the north, but unfortunately at the expense of one of Motonari's daughters, who was a political hostage of the Takahashi at the time. As soon as Motonari moved on them, the Takahashi executed her. But the net result was that the Mori clan now held even more land and political power than before. Around this time, Motonari signed pacts with 32 independent local lords with their own retainer bands, who then granted arbitration power to the Mori if requested, but otherwise considered the Mori clan first among equals rather than a full feudal lord. This setup allowed the local lords to solve their own differences as independent entities, and stated that Motonari would only step in to punish offenders if needed. Now what this did was establish a network of allies for the Mori clan across Aki province. Over the next few years, Amako Tsunehisa would try to bring the Mori back under his control, but never seemed to really be able to put anything together. Things were apparently not going well in the Amako clan because Tsunehisa's third son Okihisa raised the flag of rebellion in 1532, forcing his father to crush him. By 1538, Tsunehisa was left without a direct heir, and so he passed the clan on to his grandson Haruhisa. Tsunehisa was officially retired at this point, but was definitely still holding the reins behind the curtain. And I really get the impression that for some reason the Mori clan in particular loomed really large in the mind of Tsunehisa, as conflict was always brewing between the two clans. And I also get the impression that they had a similar relationship to Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin, a grudging respect drawn from years of conflict. Tsunehisa had to respect Motonari's ability to navigate the crazy politics between the Ouchi and Amako, and the fact that he somehow always seemed to survive despite the long odds. But, In 1540, the Yamako finally brought war to Motonari's doorstep. The Battle of Yoshida Koriyama Castle, as this overall campaign is known, consisted of a number of stages and engagements that lasted for the better part of around 6 to 8 months. In the late summer of 1540, Amako Haruhisa dispatched an advance force of 3,000 mounted cavalry led by his great-uncle Amako Hisayuki, who was Tsunehisa's brother, along with Haruhisa's uncle Kunihisa and his cousin Sanihisa for the purpose of spearheading the Aki invasion. Once in Aki province, they moved to capture 2 castles, Iwaya and Goryu, which were held by blood relatives of the Mori clan, the Shishido clan, and this was in order to open Koriyama Castle to attack from behind. But this was easier said than done. The Amako forces were confronted by 3 brothers, Shishido Takaiie, who was married to Mori Motonari's second daughter, and his 2 brothers, Shishido Motoyoshi and Fukase Takakane. And knowing that they alone held the responsibility to stop the Amako troops, they vowed to fight to the last man and ferociously attacked the enemy in what would become known as the Battle of Inukai-hira. And as a result of this battle, the Amako forces were stopped dead and they were forced to withdraw. This action by the Shishido delayed the expeditionary force from joining the initial Amako assault on Koriyama Castle 2 months later. Meanwhile, Haruhisa had dispatched a massive army of 30,000 men drawn from all his holdings into Aki province with the intention of bringing down Koriyama Castle. In preparation, Motonari evacuated about 5,000 of the surrounding townspeople into the castle, and the rest of the people fled into the mountains. Shishido Takaiie and Amano Okisada joined the defenders at Koriyama Castle, while Shishido Motoyoshi prepared for siege at Goryu Castle. Other vassals also fortified their own castles in preparation for the Amako invasion. So at Koriyama Castle, the actual Mori warriors themselves only numbered about 3,000 defenders, but many of the 5,000 peasants, merchants, and men of the castle town who were holed up in the castle would also join the fight. During the Amako advance, Motonari wasn't just sitting idly in the castle waiting for the Amako to attack. He sent out raids to harass the Amako troops under cover of darkness and fog, and also dispatched riders to call for aid from the Ouchi clan. So while the bulk of Mori forces were mostly tied up with the defense of Koriyama Castle specifically, the Amako destroyed a number of Koriyama's outlying forts and attacked Koriyama's accompanying castle town of Yoshida. But Yoshida didn't go down without a fight. Records indicate that the townspeople who had fled to the mountains fought valiantly against the Amako, but the town was eventually burned to the ground. Despite all this, Motonari refused to submit, so the Amako attempted to besiege Koriyama directly. The Mori were able to hold out against the siege, and Ouchi Yoshitaka dispatched his general, Sue Harukata, to relieve Koriyama Castle. And Harukata arrived on the battlefield about 4 months after the initial invasion at the head of 10,000 men. When they arrived on the battlefield, the Mori rallied from the castle to join forces with Harukata, and it was at this time the Amako forces that had been stymied by the Shishido brothers arrived, led by Amako Hisayuki, and they reconnected with Amako Haruhisa's main force. During the ensuing battle, Amako Haruhisa found himself isolated and under direct attack by Ouchi forces, and things looked pretty grim. That is, until his great-uncle Hisayuki appeared at the head of 500 mounted cavalry, and put himself between the attacking Ouchi soldiers and Haruhisa's men. After some parting words with Haruhisa, Hisayuki led a charge directly into the Ouchi ranks, allowing Haruhisa to escape. Hisayuki himself killed over a dozen men before he was shot through the head by an arrow and killed. And it's unclear exactly how old Hisayuki was when he charged into battle that day, but he was somewhere between the age of 60 and 80 years old. The men of the Amako clan were particularly long-lived, except when they get shot in the head with arrows, but if you look at the history, you'll see that a lot of Amako men lived well into their 80s and some into their 90s. The Amako clan ultimately withdrew their battered army out of Aki province, and the defeat of the Amako had the benefit of isolating the Mori's enemies, the Takeda, who had come to rely on the Amako for aid. Motonari threatened Takeda Nobuzane, who had fought on behalf of the Amako during the invasion, but had been defeated by Mori vassal Kunishi Motoshige during the siege of Koriyama. And Nobuzane fled to Izumo province, and his castle was afterwards surrendered. So this basically marked the end of the Takeda clan power in Aki province for all time. By the end of 1541, Amako Tsunehisa died, still a capable strategist and fearsome warrior, even at 82 years old. There's no record of Motonari's reaction to Tsunehisa's death, but I have to imagine that it was probably a combination of sadness and relief. After all, Tsunehisa had been a figure in Motonari's life ever since he was a child, both as an enemy and an ally. And I imagine, much like how Uesugi Kenshin respected Takeda Shingen enough to mourn his passing, if nothing else, Motonari would have felt the loss of his respected foe. But that being said, with the death of Tsunehisa, Motonari, who was never one to let an opportunity pass him by, moved to take advantage of the situation. Amako Tsunehisa was dead, and Haruhisa had taken a beating a year before at Yoshida Koriyama, so Motonari and Ouchi Yoshitaka planned a campaign to bring down the Amako clan's main castle, Gassan Toda. The combined forces mobilized in January of 1542 and set out. So Gassan Toda Castle is about 70 miles from Motonari's Koriyama Castle, which according to Google Maps is about a 2-hour, 3-minute drive by car, but a lot further for an army on foot. Probably about 2 days forced march, give or take. But anyway, the armies marched and the Ouchi brought down Akana Castle on the Iwami-Izumo border after a 3-month siege, and eventually the allies came together and moved on Gassan Toda some months later. But it had been a long and hard road, and by this time their troops were weary from the constant campaigning, and they were also at this point at the absolute limits of their supply lines. And on top of that, it turns out that they lacked the numbers required to assure a decisive victory, or, at this point, even a reasonable chance of successfully storming the castle. So, after the new year, the Allies opted to avoid a castle siege, and after some inconclusive skirmishes, the Allies conceded defeat and withdrew. And this withdrawal turned into a fighting retreat due to attacks by the Amako as they pulled out. So with that, the first battle of Gassan Toda Castle was a definite failure by the Allies. But fortunately for Motonari, it wasn't terribly costly for the Mori. Pride and morale probably took a bigger hit than anything. But this campaign marked a distinct turning point in the western provinces. Motonari returned to Koriyama to regroup, while Yoshitaka was devastated by the failure. He withdrew to Yamaguchi Castle in Suo Province and increasingly relied on his senior retainers to manage the Ouchi domain. But, honestly, in the long run, the failed incursion into Amako territory probably benefited the Mori more than it cost them. Ouchi Yoshitaka began to withdraw from leadership, leaving the Ouchi a little directionless, giving Motonari far more leeway to expand throughout Aki Province and consolidate his power. In the meantime, the Amako took advantage of their recent victory, or at least lack of defeat, to push their influence into the lands to their east, Hoki Province, Mimasaka Province, and Bichu Province. Over the next few years, Motonari took advantage of the situation and developed alliances with the Kumagai and Murakami clans. The Murakami clan in particular is notable as essentially a band of inland sea pirates, and Mori's alliance with the leader of the Murakami pirates, Murakami Torayasu, would pay dividends for years to come. Motonari also started to delve heavily into marriage politics to continue to consolidate his power. In 1541, the head of the Kobayakawa clan in southern Aki province, Okikage, died without an heir. After a long negotiation, Motonari's third son Takakage was installed as the head of the clan. And in 1543, when the head of a second Kobayakawa branch died, it was arranged that Takakage would marry his widow, bringing both Kobayakawa branches together and now under Mori control. And as a bonus, this unification of the Kobayakawa clan brought together a massive naval power. So in addition to the Murakami pirates, Motonari also gained control of massive naval power under the Kobayakawa clan. And Motonari used a similar strategy with the Kikkawa clan as well. The Mori clan and Kikkawa clans had existing marital ties, including Motonari's wife, and Motonari leveraged these ties to ally with many powerful Kikkawa clan members, who then forced the head of the clan, Kikkawa Okitsune, to retire. Motonari then turned around and installed his second son, Motoharu, as the head of the Kikkawa clan. And to avoid any further issues, he then attacked and killed Okitsune and all of his supporters. Once his two sons were firmly in place, Motonari developed what he called the Two Rivers policy. The Kikkawa and Kobayakawa clans were both brought under the direct influence of the Mori clan. The Rivers title comes from the Kawa in their names, the Japanese character for river shared by both the Kikkawa and Kobayakawa. Motonari's eldest son and heir, a one-time hostage of the Ouchi clan, was Takamoto, who was in line to take over the Mori clan after Motonari either stepped down or kicked the bucket. Another event in 1550 also served to strengthen the Mori position among the local lords in his domain. Motonari expelled the Inoue clan from the pact signed in 1532 by the local lords. The head of the Inoue clan, Inoue Motokane, had been attempting to build his own power base in Aki province, making backroom deals with other lords, not paying his land taxes, and ignoring his duties to the Mori clan, in particular his military obligations. All told, 30 members of the Inoue clan, including Motokane, were executed. Using the Inoue clan's misdeeds as an excuse, Motonari declared that he had the authority to dole out punishments in his domains, and had 23 individual retainers from across his holdings sign oaths to this effect, establishing that the Mori clan had dominion over all of them, and that they would hereby give up any rights to arbitration, invasion, or expansion. So with this, Mori Motonari was officially raised to the status of regional lord over dozens of families. But the lords agreed to this, hoping that having a centralized authority in Motonari would be more effective than the independent setup that had previously been in place. Between this and the loyal support of the Kikkawa and Kobayakawa clans, Mori Motonari had firmly established himself as a regional power. Now at this point, things started to develop within the Ouchi clan, and these developments would have far-reaching consequences for the Mori clan. So for some background, like I mentioned, Ouchi Yoshitaka had stepped back from running the Ouchi clan after the Izumo mess in 1542 and 43. During the next 7 years, he handed over most martial matters to his retainers, most notably the Naito and Sue Harukata, and completely dove into culture and court life to the exclusion of pretty much everything else. And by this time, the city of Yamaguchi was prospering. It was a massive city that was noted by Portuguese visitors at the time as a cosmopolitan city that was rich, clean, and orderly, and was the center of trade with Korea and China. In fact, some in China at the time even mistook Yamaguchi for the capital of Japan. And in contrast to the actual capital, Kyoto, Yamaguchi was doing exceedingly well. Many nobles and artists had even transferred from Kyoto to Yamaguchi. Kyoto, meanwhile, was falling apart, and according to some accounts, even in the 1540s, there were still whole areas of Kyoto that were abandoned. In fact, Yoshitaka was so well connected to the capital by blood and marriage that he freely communicated with the emperor, which was really unheard of for anyone not at the highest levels of the court. This facilitated the flow of power in the direction of Yamaguchi, and not to mention, I'm sure that the fact that he committed massive amounts of money to the emperor and the upkeep of the imperial palace also helped. So under Ouchi Yoshioki and then his son Yoshitaka, Yamaguchi became the Western Center for Arts and Culture in Japan. And ironically, this focus on arts and culture and the co-opting of the true capital would result in the downfall of the clan that was so complete, within a generation the once thriving city of Yamaguchi would be almost wiped off the map. So the typical short explanation given for the fall of the Ouchi clan is the opportunistic rebellion of one of his generals, Sue Harukata. The typical story goes that Harukata was unhappy with his lord Yoshitaka, basically ignoring clan administration and spending all his time with nobles and poets, and so he rebelled. And Mori Motonari swept in and finished him off. That's the old standby. That's kind of the standard story, but there was actually a lot more to it. Now, Harukata did rebel, but it wasn't as simple as an opportunistic takeover. Harukata was known as one of the Ouchi's most loyal and capable generals, and also one of Yoshitaka's oldest friends. They actually grew up together. So the idea of rebellion was not taken lightly by Harukata. But as Yoshitaka moved away from his clan duties and administration and focused more on cultural pursuits, Harukata became pushed out and disdained by Yoshitaka's new inner circle. Yoshitaka surrounded himself with court nobility, tea masters, poets, and every other assorted type of artist and cultured person you can think of. And he was actually even eventually named governor of Yamashiro province, which was the home of Kyoto and the emperor. At this point, all of this culture and poetry must have gone to his head because he came up with the idea of actually moving the capital and the emperor from Kyoto to Yamaguchi. And he was actually encouraged by the mob of nobility and artisans who had come to Yamaguchi from the crumbling capital. In fact, by the 8th month of 1551, the majority of the court, aside from the actual emperor himself, had already come to Yamaguchi in preparation for the move. Suffice it to say, none of this sat well with Harukata, who went from Yoshitaka's loyal best friend and general to essentially being replaced by a calligrapher who became Yoshitaka's closest confidant. And Harukata's dissatisfaction didn't go unnoticed by Yoshitaka's other vassals either. In early 1551, one vassal, Sagara Taketo, wrote to Yoshitaka that Sue Harukata and another Ouchi vassal, Naito Okimori, were planning to rebel, and that Sugi Shigenori, another formerly loyal vassal, was also in on it. And Yoshitaka basically dismissed the threat. although this did create a deeper division between the military men and the court-obsessed Yoshitaka and just really helped to seal his fate. Other military men were also aware of Harukata's dissatisfaction with Yoshitaka's leadership, but when Yoshitaka continued to do nothing about it, they ended up throwing in with Harukata. Harukata didn't find his way to rebellion in a vacuum, though. The Miyoshi clan, which held Kyoto and were invested in the capital staying right where it was, corresponded secretly with Harukata through a court noble on the outs with the emperor, and encouraged the coup. Harukata then quietly gained the support of the Otomo clan, a powerful Kyushu clan led by Otomo Soren, by promising to put Soren's son in nominal charge of the clan after Yoshitaka was removed. Soren's son was also Yoshitaka's nephew, and so a legitimate heir to the Ouchi clan would be established. And as an added bonus, the potential destruction of Yamaguchi would shift the balance of trade power from the Ouchi clan squarely into the hands of the Otomo. Harukata also told Mori Motonari his plans, although he lied by stating that he was going to install Yoshitaka's infant son as the head of the clan. But this did secure a promise from Motonari to not intervene. Yoshitaka was actually the adoptive father of Motonari's eldest son Takamoto's wife. So Motonari didn't take this lightly, but Motonari also took a realistic look at the landscape and saw this as an opportunity to strengthen Mori control in Aki. And as far as Motonari was concerned, having Yoshitaka's true son and heir installed after the rebellion probably made the decision easier to justify in his own mind, and was probably the reason Harukata lied about it. So Motonari was aware up front that rebellion was brewing, and he just let it happen. So, as you can see, contrary to popular historical sources, Harukata didn't just wake up one morning and decide to rebel. There were a lot of moving parts to his rebellion, and by the time his strategic alliances were in place, he had the majority of Ouchi clan members on board with his plan. Ironically, part of the reason that Yoshitaka didn't take the threats seriously is that he honestly believed that when it came down to it, if something really did happen, Motonari would swoop in and save him. After all, his adopted daughter and Motonari's son were married, so he probably took comfort in that, unfortunately for him. So at the end of September 1551, Sue Harukata rebelled, along with Naito Okimori and Sugi Shigenori, the two generals fingered by Sagara Taketo. Interestingly enough, the running theory as to why Sugi Shigenori rebelled is specifically that Shigenori held a grudge against Yoshitaka because he sided with Sagara Taketo. So basically, Taketo fingering him, whether it was legitimate or not, seems to have pushed him into Harukata's camp. Even as the rebels marched on Yamaguchi, Yoshitaka still refused to believe that his generals would turn on him, and he failed to mount any real defense. Harukata marched into Yamaguchi with the Naito and Sugi and burned the place. Meanwhile, Yoshitaka and the court nobles, along with his remaining loyal retainers, gathered 2,000 troops and fled to the Hosenji mountain temple, where their plan was to prepare for a siege, but overnight the majority of troops fled or defected to Harukata's side. Yoshitaka tried to negotiate with Harukata, but at this point it was just too late. Harukata did not accept the negotiations. In fact, he had Yoshitaka's representative, who was a high-ranking court noble, cut down where he stood. Yoshitaka fled with his remaining retinue, but after being cornered and nowhere to go, he committed suicide. The rest of the entourage was slaughtered by Harukata's troops, and this included many prominent members of the imperial court, including Daimyo Takeda Shingen's father, Sanjo Kinyori, and Yoshitaka's two sons. The entire rebellion took about 2 days. This was Yoshitaka's death poem.
撃つ人も撃たれる人ももろともに女郎役女伝王サニョカゼン
Both the victor and the vanquished are but drops of dew, but bolts of lightning. Thus we should view the world. Harukata mopped up resistance, hunting down and killing the scattered court nobles and supporters of Yoshitaka in Yamaguchi, meanwhile burning and looting Yoshitaka's holdings. He also quickly made good on his promise to Otomo Soren by installing Soren's son, Otomo Haruhide, as head of the clan under the new name Ouchi Yoshinaga, while Sue Harukata pulled all the strings from behind the throne. And again, though, this was definitely not what was promised to Motonari, and this choice to lie to Motonari would come back to haunt him. But for the time being, the West fell into at least a temporary peace. And so we'll leave Motonari for now as he cleans up Yoshitaka's remaining allies in his lands and works to further consolidate his power. And we'll be back next month when Sue Harukata and Mori Motonari go head-to-head in an all-out war for dominance in the West. So while you wait for next episode, please go check out patreon.com/samurai archives to see the ways that you can help us make this podcast better and better, or give us a rating and review on iTunes. That helps just as much. And I want to give a shout out to the patrons on Patreon specifically, because you guys and girls are the ones that are really helping me up the podcast game, and I really appreciate it. So that is it for now. I will catch you next time.